Hello everyone, my name is Benjamin Yoder with One Controller Port, here today with the final 2020 review video that we're going to have this year. Previously we did a video about, some thoughts I had about games in 2020, as well as talked about a few games that surprised me this year as well. What this final video is more based on website content. If you're not super interested in hearing, how the bread is baked. Is that the saying? If you're not interested in hearing, about, what I was doing on the website and kind of the different types of implementation I was trying to kind of deliver content, then this video might not be super relevant to you. But I wanted to talk about, some of the successes that I feel like the channel had in 2020, as well as, things that I failed on. This also includes, to some extent, what I do in my personal time as well. So we'll probably talk a little bit about, what I dedicated time to this year and where I feel like I succeeded and failed there as well. And then we'll have a talk about what I intend to do in 2021. But, as you'll see when we talk about 2020, just because I say I want to do something in 2021 doesn't necessarily mean it will happen. So to get started here, I wanted to talk about things I think are a good thing for the website this year. And I think that was shorter turnaround content that's a bit more significant, that isn't doesn't feel as incomplete. So the things I can think of is, the quick plays. The quick plays are something that I've been a part of the channel for a while, very much based off like Giant Bomb's Quick Look, which was a something they did to kind of, cover a lot of games without having to, necessarily completely review them. And it works well for if you're playing a game and you don't feel like you have the full context for, you don't want to say like give a final definitive word on a game. You just kind of want to talk through it, kind of introduce people to the game and kind of give your initial impressions. And, something like the Dragon Marked for Death video, even though I played a lot of Dragon Marked for Death, I feel like there's a lot in that game I'd want to play still more before I did like a more complete review of it probably. So there are some games that process fits pretty well but I found more over time that more and more I was not feeling satisfied with what the quick plays were doing, especially if it was a game that I played through entirely and wanted to give more complete set of thoughts for. I tried to kind of solve this with something called the clips feature, the OCP clips. Because I was talking about these games in more detail on like the podcast, so I was kind of trying to repurpose that podcast audio for Twitter videos. But the reality is that the 2-minute Twitter video time limit for at least for like a non-verified account was just too short, and then also like re-editing podcast audio to kind of fit that time slot was also just like really challenging to do. So I'm really happy with the casual reviews that came out this year. You can probably tell by the fact that I do so many of them right now. It's just like a really easy way for me to, provide my full feelings on a game without having to get it, bogged down in the intricacies of like a complete script, video editing and things like that. I definitely don't want the featured reviews to end. That's something that we're probably going to focus on more early next year. We'll talk about in a little bit. But the casual reviews, I think, work really well for games that, I don't necessarily have a lot of passion to talk about, but still want to cover in some ways. That or even if I have a passion for it, it may just be something that I can't really create like a full featured review on, potentially. The featured reviews are a lot of work. And usually, at most, you're probably going to get like anywhere between 6 and 12 a year. This year, I think there's only like 3 or 4. And one of them was pretty short. The Super Mario World or Land video was a quick turnaround time review, even though it was a featured review. But yeah, this year we were a little short on featured reviews, but I don't think the casual reviews were a reasoning of why we had less featured reviews. I think the casual reviews were just something that were filling a gap that I was experiencing on the website. And I'm glad that we were able to find a format that I think finally kind of fulfills how I want to talk about games when I'm not, doing something that's more expansive kind of thing. We also had a really successful video with the PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility video. This was a video that was an incredibly short turnaround period. It was like 48 hours to write and produce and release. And what's kind of interesting about this video is that it's not even, I would say, a complete video in some ways, but it's a satisfying video because it I'm not somebody who's going to be able to like do the full research of PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility. It's just kind of out of my hands. It would take way too long, and it's not something that I would typically do a featured video on. But I was able to kind of take the research I did do and kind of take some of my personal experiences and relate that to that research, and then just kind of highlight and some things about how these things have not been super documented, and just kind of shine a light, basically do a PSA of like, hey, PlayStation 2, is not always the greatest option for PlayStation 1 support, but definitely can be very valuable, and just kind of pointing out the issues that can come with those, and also be able to document some issues. It was a fun project to do, I think, and it was actually pretty successful over the year. I think it has over 1,000 views at this point. I would have to double check, but it has consistently gotten traffic all this year, and I'm pretty happy with it. Even though it was probably the fastest piece of featured content I've ever created. Speaking of views, I'm also pretty happy that the Spectrobes review got over 10,000 views for its total history this year. So it took a long time. 10,000 is a lot for my channel for sure. But I was happy that we have some long-term content that is maintaining its relevance. I do cover a lot of older games and a lot of Wii games too, actually, specifically. I do love the Wii, and I think we're probably going to see more Wii games coming up here, and I hope that planting these older reviews of games that I think are interesting, for when people do eventually come around on them and they can look it up and talk about it, either for nostalgic reasons, or it's some people it catches their eye, like with the Aconcagua video. That one kind of stuttered out after I'd say 2 or 3 years, but the Did You Know Gaming video definitely increased people's awareness of that game, and to be able to provide a alternate impression of that game, I think was important. That video got about 2,000 or about another 1,000 views, I think, this year, due to the Did You Know Gaming video, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. And I have some disagreements with Did You Know Gaming's portrayal of Aconcagua in some ways. The video is 99% fine. There's just some particular things I'm very picky about with how people talk about Aconcagua, because there's some, in my opinion, misinformation about what kind of game Aconcagua is. And I'm glad that, even though Did You Know Gaming put out this video that got a lot of reviews or a lot of views, since then, people have come to my video where I kind of, make the counterpoint of what they are claiming. I made my video before there, so obviously I'm not directly addressing what they're saying, but I directly address kind of the commentary about Aconcagua on the internet. So I'm glad that my video is still valuable today, I think, as a balance to Did You Know Gaming's video. Again, they're very similar videos in a lot of ways, but I think that they're what my goal is usually when I make a featured review, is, if I feel like I have an opinion I can give that it differs from a lot of other opinions on the internet. I don't think I would have made the Super Mario Land video if I was just going to be like, oh, this Super Mario Land game's weird, huh? It's got shooter segments. Like, that's what everybody says about that game. Like, right? But I had some more complex thoughts about the level design and things like that. So I think that's still a really good goal. Same thing with the Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road. I watched a couple of video reviews that were on YouTube, and I'm sure those are going to get the major traffic because they already kind of have an established place on YouTube. But I kind of had a differing opinion, I think, than most of them. So I was glad I was able to kind of plant those. And yeah, like in terms of the content we're putting out, I think this year we did a really good job on more niche topics. Like I'm super happy I was able to do a Tokadol review. I was not expecting to be able to do a Tokadol feature review, and unfortunately, because I wasn't expecting that, I didn't get as much footage as I probably would like for that review. I have mostly early game footage that shows up in that review, and I would have loved to show more of what the end game of a Tokadol looks like. It largely looks the same. It gets the point across, but I would have liked to have done that. But the Tokadol video didn't get a ton of views. I think it's got like 500 or so right now, but considering the niche the niche topic that is, I'm pretty happy overall with how it performs, and I'm hoping maybe in the future, we do more Fashion Rhythm adjacent titles or games that are actual Fashion Rhythm titles. And if those get more traffic, then maybe I can push people to the Tokadol video a bit more and kind of raise the exposure of a Tokadol a bit more. Unfortunately, Tokadal seems like it's very much a dead game, so I don't think raising the exposure is going to do much for the game itself at this point. But I think it's important that a lot of people. I think the fashion rhythm genre, or that type of game, if you don't want to call it that genre, I know it's a genre that I pulled out of my ass essentially, but that type of game I think is something I would like people in the world to be more aware of and take more seriously. Obviously, they're aimed towards kids, so I get it. But I think there's value there in the type of game that is. We also had the PCFX podcast. I haven't looked at the PCF podcast reviews lately, but in terms of all the collaboration podcasts, it's definitely been the most successful one. Admittedly, the PCFX fan base is pretty, I think, dedicated. I definitely saw that it got passed around some PCFX circles and things like that. So I'm pretty happy about how that podcast did. And, as somebody who really wants to do more with the PCFX, being able to create or to counter the narrative about the PCFX that was out there in a podcast form that was a bit more expansive, I think is something that I'm pretty satisfied with. I think it's the best thing I could have done right now. I think there are better ways to kind of push the PCFX out there and kind of, recontextualize, the PCFX within, what it means from the Japanese video game industry, where I think most PCFX conversation out there is usually, a post after the fact kind of thing, where a Westerner imports it and goes, "I love the PC Engine. What the heck is this?" kind of thing. And that's not, I get it. That's not necessarily like a wrong opinion, right? If you're importing this thing as like a new retro console to you, and you're like, I want to check this thing out, and it's like a bunch of games that are super text heavy and dense, and built off years of Japanese PC games that you have no experience with, right? It's kind of just like, well, what else would you think, right? Like that's the thing. But I am very happy that we were able to put out something that was kind of a counter narrative to what was out there with the PCFX conversation, and offer a different perspective, right? I never want to say that somebody's wrong for their opinion about what they say about a console. I mean, there's definitely things that can be like factually inaccurate kind of things. Like I don't want to point fingers at anybody, because I definitely appreciate this person's content that I've seen in the past, and I don't want to give them a hard time about it. But I was watching a video once where somebody called Team Innocent an FMV game, and I'm like, that's kind of misleading. I get what they mean, that there's a lot of graphics and stuff that you're kind of watching with that game, and it's a very story heavy game. And I think the point they got across was that it is a game that is dense in you listening and kind of consuming information rather than you actively playing the game. But I think saying it's an FMV game is definitely a little misleading. But I'm just as guilty for, calling all games that look like visual novels, even though there's a very dense, different or very, very extensive history of the games that are in that kind of format, and, how they're separated out as like adventure games versus, dating sims versus, whatever. I'm really bad about that. That is something I probably still need to have a better idea of how to define, because I still say visual novel as kind of a catch-all, two character portraits talking on screen kind of thing. So, and, I'm pretty happy with the diversity in content this year as well. I'm glad that we were able to do a PCFX video and then also have like a Super Mario Land video and a Tokadal video. I think those are very, very different topics, but they all fall under kind of the umbrella of the type of things I want to talk about. And I know that doesn't really work well for probably building an audience. Like, I'm guessing people who are coming to me for PCFX content have not been particularly happy with the year, since I basically stopped doing PCFX stuff, middle of this year. I plan to get back to PCFX for sure, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for sure, it is a little, I always feel bad that, like Chibi Robo fans come and they're like, "Oh, yay, thanks for the video for Chibi Robo, subscribe." And I'm like, I have not talked about anything Skip related since basically So yeah. So I think those are the things that I'm very happy with this year on the website. The things that did not work out this year. If you go read the last year's 2019 in review, my goal for this year was to kind of make it the year of the RPG for me. I wanted to finish up Xenoblade Chronicles X this year. I wanted to play other Monolith Soft RPGs as well, including Soma Bringer, Endless Frontier, Xseed. None of that happened. I'm still not done with Xenoblade Chronicles X. I started it like in March rather than in January like I expected, and then I didn't put the time into it that I needed to, and I'm still probably a good 30 to 40 hours away from beating it. So I'm kind of disappointed in myself that I didn't clean up Xenoblade Chronicles X this year, because that is definitely a huge block for me in terms of getting past this kind of JRPG logjam that I've had for a long time. And then there's another issue where one of the things I mentioned in the last year was like, I wanted to do a Valkyria Revolution video, and I was like, this will probably be a very easy video to put together because I already did a written review for Valkyria Revolution. But I was incredibly wrong on that. The script for the Valkyria Revolution video did not come together at all. I spent way too much time on it. It just kind of lingered, and I spent months on that Valkyria Revolution script and just it never came together until only recently when I revisited it, and I'm finally happy with it. But that pushed back 2 to 3 months worth of content this year probably. And it is a happy accident that I did make that PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility video as a response to not having anything done for the Valkyria Revolution review. But I do think that I don't know. I need to figure out a better way to handle situations like that where a script is just not working, even if it just means moving on to something else, like identifying that something's not working, saying, I just need to revisit this in the future and then we'll figure it out then, kind of thing. I had a very similar problem with Castlevania 64 where that script just would not come together. And it took me, I think, 2 months to finish the Castlevania 64 script. Which, obviously I'm not working on it nonstop, but, for as much time as I can offer for this being a hobby and, trying to keep up with, the weekly content and also, keep up, some kind of featured content otherwise. There were some other log jams as well, where like the Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road, I was originally going to do a written review, but I felt passionate enough about it that I wanted to do a video review of it. And, unfortunately, capturing the Wizard of Oz is not an easy thing because I don't have a DS capture card, and I usually capture DS games through a Wii U, but the game would just crash on Wii U, so I had to figure out, how to make it work in a PC emulator setting in a way that I could capture it and feel satisfied that, it would largely communicate the experience to the person watching the video without looking like it was a mess on emulator, which was the challenge, especially since that's a very touchscreen heavy game and I had to use the mouse cursor to essentially play that game. And I think we largely were successful, but I do always kind of wish that I could have gotten actual gameplay from the system itself, but I just don't have a DS capture card at this point, unfortunately. It's that market is just kind of a nightmare right now. So maybe in the future we'll get a DS capture card. I think the most ideal thing would be if they put out a 3DS capture card. Obviously that doesn't cover everything. There will be inconsistencies and incompatibility. We won't be able to directly capture Guitar Hero for the DS because we need that Game Boy Advance slot, right? but it's an option, like it would be a good option to have for the majority of DS games and be able to run on actual hardware. But I have not seen a lot of, progress in the 3DS or DS capture card market, and the hardware that's out there seems, finicky kind of at best. So yeah. Another thing that I don't think I did a good job of this year is capitalizing on content that it becomes unexpectedly popular. So one thing I did in like 2012 was I made a video about Phantasy Star Portable. And when Phantasy Star Online 2 came out, I think it kind of triggered I don't know if nostalgia is the right word, but an interest in the Phantasy Star brand again, and people have very clearly been watching that Phantasy Star Portable review. People have been watching it, today. I think I looked at it today, and it was still one of the top viewed videos on the channel in terms of the daily traffic. But I never, like, I have plenty to say about Phantasy Star, and there's a lot I can do, but I haven't, even though it's been like 6 months, I have not, if not longer actually. It's pretty much whenever, I feel like it was around like January or something, maybe even before that. Maybe it was even a last year thing. I just have not taken the time to capitalize that. And you know, at the end of the day, this is a hobby. I'm going to do what I want to do, right? I don't want to be too hard on myself because I'm doing this for fun. And if I worry too much about, you know, views or anything like that, you know, then what's the point? You know, I'm you know, if I made money, that'd be a whole other thing, maybe even not even that, but yeah, but I mean, like, I like Phantasy Star. There are Phantasy Star videos I want to make, but I just, you know, it would have been better for me to like drop the Valkyria Revolution video and go work on a Phantasy Star video for a month instead, and really try to capture that popularity that video has had. And it's still probably important for me to do that. You know, still want to do those Phantasy Star videos, but I don't quite know when it will happen. The collaboration podcast this year kind of fell through in the back half. I'm really happy. You know, they didn't get a lot of views, and I'm not really great at marketing my stuff, and I feel kind of bad, especially, you know, I try to be upfront when I you know, present these podcasts, like, hey, when we're looking for people, I'm like, hey, this is a small podcast. We typically have 20 to 30 listeners at most. And I don't want to give you the impression this is going to be some big thing. But I am very happy with the Gun Pixies podcast and how it turned out in the end. I think the editing process for the Gun Pixies podcast, I learned a lot from the Gun Pixies podcast. There's a lot of problems I had in how I conducted that podcast, I think, and also really how I conducted the podcast. That was the issue more than anything. I would really like to work with Peter again someday. Or Pete, sorry. I really would like to work with Pete again someday and do a proper podcast with them. I feel like that podcast, it was more of me talking over him more than anything. And I think the end product that came out of that was not bad. But I don't think it was a great experience. I think it could have been better, and I think it could have been more of a conversation, I guess, is the thing. I like the podcast I did with Keith Shizuo. Again, that one didn't get a lot of traction, but it was like, you know, a topic I like to talk about, you know, collecting cheap games. That is what I like to do. You know, I like to get, you know, Happy Dance collection for $2 and be like, this game is cool, but it's got problems, but still that doesn't mean it's not fun and worth the cheap cost of it, right? I enjoyed that. And the PCFX podcast was a real challenge for a lot of reasons. I'm really bad at audio. I'm not an audio guy. So there's a challenge on audio balancing and things like that. And I would like to be better at that. I tried to learn to be better at audio balancing during that podcast process, but I think I just messed up the audio even more. So in the end, you know, it could have been better, but I think the end, one of those cases where the end product, I think, turned out really good. You know, Filler was a great podcast host. I'm really happy with how that conversation went. I think I learned a lot from that Gun Pixies podcast that I really applied to both the Keith podcast and the PCFX podcast. But yeah, but unfortunately they kind of fell off after that. I'm trying to think of what I could have done for the collab podcast dropping off in the second half of the year. But I think in reality of the situation, there wasn't a lot I could have done without putting a lot of extra work on myself. So I don't want to beat myself up too much about it. I would say maybe this is a success. Maybe I should recontextualize this as a success. You know, I took what was not working with the collab podcast and kind of fixed it up. I feel like personally, obviously the person on the other side of the podcast can feel differently, but I feel like I fixed up the podcast process, and hopefully I continue to maintain that more conversational aspect rather than me talking at somebody aspect. Because I feel like with the Gun Pixies podcast, it was more of me just wanting to say what I want and not really, you know, focusing on what the other person wants to say about the game. The last thing I want to talk about is, and this, you know, I think this is a failure on my part. I don't want to, like, I'm going to talk about some different outlets here, but I don't want to point fingers or anything like that. because I think it's kind of the nature of the machine. I lost control of the Chibi Robo story. So if you don't know, I did some research videos on the Chibi Robo series, and I put out 2 videos, one last year and one this year, and the first video, I did have some problems where some information was not reported correctly by other outlets. So some bad info got passed around. I mean, my original video was correct, but because how the video game news machine works is basically one person writes up the story on like a blog somewhere, and then everybody just kind of copies that information without necessarily looking at the source. It's a bad way to do journalistic work, but it's kind of how the video game news industry works. I would say video game news industry is very amateurish, and that's just how it is. I've been there. I get it. I understand. I'm not blaming anybody. That's just the situation that thing is. And until we see some major change in how that's handled, that's just kind of how it's going to be, right? And I don't blame anybody. I've been there before. I've done the exact same thing. I understand. But the second video, I was not really happy with how it got spread around after that. The information was largely accurate. I did have to make a correction to my video, which thankfully some sites picked up on, specifically that the Chibi or the Skip website is still up and live, but you can only access it via an IP address. I've not checked recently, so I'm not sure if that's still the case. But at the time, you could still access the Skip websites via the IP address, just the domain was not working for that address anymore. And but when it got sourced later on, it got sourced to Ben, which yes, my name is indeed Ben. But how many Bens are there in the world, right? And it didn't necessarily come back to one controller port, so it was hard to identify, where the original information came from. And I think you'd definitely be like, well, Ben, what's important is the information got out there, right? Which is true. Yes, 100%. The story is what's important, and it's important people know about that. And you can say whatever you want about how caught up I get about some information being reported on without really being able to come back to me. You can be like, oh, well, you're just trying to, get clout or something, whatever you want to say. I'm not going to get into that whole conversation, but I can say this, putting all that aside, however you feel about that. I can say this, though. It is better for being able to track back sources if people can identify where information came from and make sure, if they need to check for accuracy, like that original video where people reported on it incorrectly, if they need to check the accuracy, they can get back to me about it. And if they ever need to ask questions, I'm always happy to answer those questions too. And I just lost control of that video. It didn't really come back to me very often. There's some sites that did a good job, and I went ahead and reached out to them because I was like, thank you for doing this properly. And I think I just need a better plan before I do a video like that I know is going to be newsworthy, to make sure that people are reporting on it A, correctly, B, properly sourcing it, and that might need me to pre-communicate with them about like, hey, I have something like this coming up. What can I do to make this work for us together? And maybe nobody will respond, but I want to try to do that in the future. And I think it might help, avoid some confusion. So yeah. Anyways, that's it for 2020 stuff in review. So what are the plans for 2021? In the short term, I think what I really want to focus on in terms of featured content is featured reviews. I have a backlog of feature reviews that I've been wanting to get to, and because featured reviews were kind of short in supply last year, I kind of want to make up for it a little bit. I've got 3 that I've already talked about. Valkyria Revolution review, that script has come together. I just have to actually push forward on finishing that process. The Billy Hatcher review, I'm pretty sure that script is pretty good. It's going to be a bit more of a critical piece in terms of, I didn't like Billy Hatcher very much, so, it's going to not be a feel-good video that I know some people might want from me. It might be more like the Breath of the Wild video, where I think a lot of people are a little disappointed at my opinion of that game when they try to look up, videos about Billy Hatcher. But, there's only so much I can do. I try my best to consider how other people might play Billy Hatcher and what the game's strengths are. That's important to me, being like, hey, the game works really well in these ways, but the rest of the game has problems. Cinema Cougar Reflections review, same kind of deal with that one. I'm a little bit more negative on that one, but I am passionate about talking about that at some point. And then I want to do the Fantasy Star reviews too, if I can this year, but those are a bit more further out, so I probably wouldn't expect those until latter in the year, maybe. I do have one other one in mind, but I don't want to commit to it, just in case it's just like a current fleeting interest of mine. So I don't want to, sit there and promise something that I probably won't get to for another 10 months. We'll be talking about it at the end of 2021. So I will not say much more than that. The collab podcasts are probably going to remain on hold a bit longer. I would like to do more. I've got some ideas of what I want to do with them, but the biggest problem with the collab podcasts is they take a lot of research usually, and a lot of coordinating too. So we had the Last Story one that's still planning on happening, as far as I'm aware. We're just kind of on hold at the moment. But we'll get to that. I'm not quite sure how much effort that's going to take. I would like to try to continue to produce video for those podcasts, but it might be a little challenging to properly edit video to those videos or to those podcasts. So we'll have to see. I also am looking at potentially doing some follow-up PCFX podcast. Maybe talking a bit more about some additional games, just kind of a expanded talking podcast, not something that's going to really probably build a narrative like we did with the original one to kind of counter that, just kind of bonus content about PCFX essentially. And then also I have, I really want to do a We Ski Go Vacation kind of podcast as well at some point. I have not reached out to the person that I'd like to speak to for that podcast, but I would like to reach out to them. Once I get myself a copy of Go Vacation and probably put some time into it, then I'll probably reach out. And if it doesn't work out, then either I'll find somebody else or we'll just stick to having the reviews on the YouTube channel for We Ski and Go Vacation. And the last thing I think I also really want to focus on is, maybe creating some more outward reaching content. And what I mean by that is content that has a presentation is more aimed towards grabbing people who necessarily wouldn't be looking up individual games, right? I don't want it to be super clickbaity, but it will probably be more clickbaity than my normal videos. But the real, I don't want those to be my main content. As a hobby, that is not my intention, is to do that. So even if they get a lot of views, I don't anticipate those kind of replacing anything. But I do want to take, maybe have something like, here's a GameCube video that talks about, my favorite GameCube games. But it will always, my hope would be with a twist, towards my taste, right? I'm not going to get on a GameCube video and talk about Wind Waker probably, right? Everybody knows Wind Waker's a good Zelda game. Has its problems, but it's a good Zelda game. I don't need to tell you that. But there are GameCube games that I like that I think I is valuable, to reach out and talk about. And I think those would be more of considered bridge content for me, stuff that, hopefully somebody would come look at the rest of the channel, and if they find that, they like my general interests and tastes, they can continue tuning in. But the intention would be to bring people in. It would not be to create an ecosystem where I'm making content surrounded, like focused on the GameCube or something, right? And I want these to be one of those shorter form or shorter production line videos. I don't want to invest a ton of time into the creation of these videos. I think they would be, list format kind of stuff, things that I can throw together fairly easily, don't have to play through an entire game to give complete thoughts on, because that's going to take away from the featured content and talk about things that I want to talk about, and I would hope you guys want to listen up to, about things like Valkyrie Revolution. Right? Probably nobody in the world wants to hear me talk about Valkyrie Revolution outside the people who just think my opinion's weird on those games, right? But those are the kind of games I want to cover. So if we do that outward reaching content, I think it'd be strategically labeled. So if you see some clickbaity title from me on those, you're welcome to chastise me about it. I don't feel good about it either, for sure. But my hope would be is to try to bring people in to see what I'm creating. But again, I'll never say never, but I don't want that to be the focus of the channel. I would want it to be something I, put out, It sits there, people look up GameCube, interesting GameCube games or something, and then that pops up and they watch it and like, oh, this stuff is interesting. Let me go look at the Atokadol video. I'm sure that series of steps doesn't really happen, but that would be kind of the intention, is to have something more outward facing, to hopefully get a bit more exposure on that stuff. Yeah, and I like the GameCube and I like the Wii, and there's games that I might want to talk about that I don't necessarily want to do whole reviews for. So it's not necessarily a bad thing 100% for me. I just don't want it to be a focus of the channel. I don't want to have this entire year's featured content be list content for the Wii, right? Be like top 5 Wii games you never heard of. What's something? Counterforce. That Counterforce video is weirdly popular. The stream I did. Don't ask me why. Maybe the same people who are like playing Wii Ski are like, hey, I grew up playing Counterforce and watching it. But yeah, and then I think we'll also have that mini Final Fantasy XI data mining series. Again, it's gonna be one of those things that I don't want to spend a lot of time on. So I think it will be kind of more of a relaxed format for that data mining stuff. I would love to be super in depth on these kind of things, but I don't have really the tools or capabilities to be a data miner. But I have the tools and capabilities to look at stuff in a model viewer and make commentary on it and kind of talk about the various resources I'm aware of and kind of contextualizing that stuff in a proper way, because the problem with Final Fantasy XI data mining is that there's a lot of information out there about people talking about it in a way that's not really evidence-based. It's very speculative, and people don't necessarily cover it in the way that I think is appropriate, probably. So I think we'll do that as well, and I haven't done one of those yet, but I think we'll probably early in the year try to test something out. And the first one might take longer to make than the other ones, but I think the later ones are going to be shorter because there will be less to talk about in some of those maps. Some of those maps are pretty barren for the most part, but there are interesting things to say about them at the very least. So, yeah. And I guess that's it. In terms of actual games I want to focus on, Xenoblade Chronicles X is still... I'm not going to promise I'm going to finish that, but I want to finish it. I really want to finish it. That is a immense... I would love to finish it before June, but I said that last time, so I don't want to commit to it. But I will get back to Xenoblade Chronicles X at some point, and hopefully we'll beat it. And hopefully we can move on with our lives. And then I think I'm going to focus more on Wii games, in the near future. I'm a big fan of the Wii. And I think it's a platform that is being talked about again more. I'm not somebody who's particularly nostalgic for the Wii per se. Like with most consoles, none of them ever really went away from me. I'm still playing my Nintendo 64. I'm playing Indiana Jones in the Infernal Machine right now, right? I just play these consoles like because I've always played them. I never stopped playing Nintendo 64 games, right? So the Wii is definitely just a system I love personally. It's not something I'm like, oh, I'm nostalgic and I want to talk about them kind of thing. But I think there are a lot of people who are interested in talking about the Wii recently, and doing more casual reviews about Wii games I think would be good for the channel, and I would have fun doing it, right? So I really am hopeful on that, and I really want to focus on doing some more PCFX stuff, even if it's just individual videos, and hopefully doing more PC98 stuff. I only played one game on my PC98 this year, and I think that's very disappointing. So yeah. So a bit more vague in terms of games I can be playing this year, honestly. But that's probably for the best. Until Xenoblade Chronicles X is out the window, I don't think I should be making any real major commitments, because that is my commitment. I want to finish that game before I die. Hopefully before the next Monolith Soft game is announced, right? So yeah, we'll see. Anyways, onecontrolboard.com is the website. If you didn't see, I had other 2020 content in relation to my thoughts on games this year, as well as titles that surprised me this year. I recently had a stream where I talked about my Japan trip. So if you want to see that, that is on the website as well. And yeah, I'm gonna probably take a break. This is the last video I'm recording outside of probably the 5th or 6th thing I've recorded this Christmas weekend. I'm beat. I've talked so much. I streamed a bunch. I made 3 2020 videos. I went ahead and recorded the podcast. It's like a 40-minute podcast. I'm ready to take a break. So So, I'll be back for I mean, I'll still do my weekly podcast, still be doing the weekly streams, but maybe take a little bit of a break for the new year. And then once we get into the new year, we start pushing hard on these featured reviews, hopefully, and get some content out, get some major content out, hopefully, not just this weekly stuff that I've been doing. So yeah, I hope that's good for you. And I hope it works out for me too. So yeah, I hope you guys had a great 2020 in terms of video games. I'm not going to talk about 2020 in terms of real life stuff, but I hope you guys have a great 2021. I hope 2020 wasn't too bad to you. And hopefully, things will get back to normal here in a little bit. And by the time everything's back to normal, hopefully I'll have beat Xenoblade Chronicles X. So anyways, you guys have a great New Year. Bye.